Hey guys, this is Jeff Stanek with Figured Out Baseball. Got a really good Figured Out Baseball podcast today, and one that I've been looking forward to for a while. The guest and I today have been, we tried to find a time for a podcast about, I'd say a year ago or so, and we finally just kind of circled back around with each other. So pretty excited about this one. Today's podcast is brought to you by Crossover Symmetry and armcare.com, which is a little bit of a coincidence maybe that we'll be talking about a lot of those same sorts of things with the guests today. We're lucky enough to be joined today by Dr. Kevin McGovern. If you're on social media, he's got a great Twitter handle, which I really enjoy, and that's kind of how he and I first connected, was just some commonalities that we kind of discovered through Twitter. But I'll give you a background on on Kevin McGovern before we get into questions with him. I guess I'm used to having coaches on here. But I'll give you a background on Dr. McGovern before we get into questions with him and start to talk about some things I think all of our subscribers are really going to enjoy listening to. Dr. McGovern is a doctor of physical therapy. He's also a certified strength and conditioning specialist. He is the owner currently of Perfect Motion Sports Therapy in Acton, Massachusetts. I'll give you, and then going a little further back in his background, he received his bachelor's degree from Northeastern University with a degree in physical therapy. He got his doctorate in physical therapy from Simmons University. He also then in 2002 became a certified strength and conditioning specialist. So he's been a CSCS for quite a while, has had that certification for quite a while. In his past, he founded two other physical therapy practices, McGovern Physical Therapy as well as G.A.M.E Physical Therapy. He is the inventor of G.A.M.E, which is capital G, period, capital A, period, capital M, capital E. It stands for Graded Active Movement Exam, and G.A.M.E is a system of evaluation and corrective exercises for athletes, something that we might have to ask a little more about for anyone who's interested in hearing more about that. Dr. McGovern is also the creator and host of a podcast called Prove It Live, which is a really cool podcast. I've listened to several episodes of it, and I really have enjoyed the time that I've listened to it. You can find the Prove It Live podcast on YouTube or on their website, proveitlive.com. Dr. McGovern is also the founder of Velocity RX, which is a pitching program that he's got some goals for in 2022 moving forward. He has worked with athletes from all different sports, different levels in baseball. He's worked with athletes all the way up through the major league level. He's worked with USA Women's Hockey. He's worked with Olympic judo competitors as well as athletes from the WWE. Dr. McGovern, I really, really appreciate you being on the podcast with us today.
Well, hey, thanks for having me. I know it's been a little bit, you definitely had talked a year or so ago about me coming on, so with everything that's happened, I'm glad you've thought about me and invited me to come on today.
I'm really excited about this one, honestly. As people know that listen to our podcasts, the majority of our guests are coaches, mostly at the college level, some at the pro level, but I do like to have specialists on from time to time that just know more than most of us. And with your background, Kevin, and all the things that you've done, I come into this podcast thinking I'm going to learn a lot about a lot of things, primarily about throwing and arm health, but also just kind of want to let you lead this and lead the direction of it to a point. But coming into this, I'm thinking, this is going to be a great podcast for anybody that works with pitchers at any level in particular, but also probably all baseball coaches, that whether they work with pitchers, position players, or what have you. But to start with, usually I start with something from the bio that stands out, but actually for you, I want to start with something different, a little bit different. I'd like to give you a chance at first to talk about maybe just bullet points, with maybe not going in depth now, but bullet points of some things that you believe need to be addressed in youth baseball today. Some of the bigger issues, which is, partly what I read from you on Twitter. It's what a lot of your podcast episodes are about, things that I think are controversial subjects, controversial topics in youth baseball today. And when we say youth baseball, we're talking, little league all through high school baseball. But what are some of the things that you believe need to be addressed, need to maybe change a little bit, or are some of the bigger problems that we've got in baseball at those levels when it comes to the physical therapy side of things and what you're seeing are issues in young athletes?
that's certainly a loaded question. Just in my practice alone, I mean, the amount of injuries are on a dramatic rise, and when we speak about baseball players, especially pitchers, the injuries are really catastrophic, meaning, we're talking, let's hit right at it. We're talking, Tommy John issues. I mean, these injuries are requiring, they're not like little bumps and bruises that you might get on the football field. I mean, people are coming in with, torn fractured growth plates, torn omocollidial ligaments, shoulder impingements. And for me, as, a clinician, baseball coach, kind of a movement guy, I think a lot of these can be prevented, and with the dawning of social media, now I don't know if there's a connection, but certainly we have seen a meteoric rise of injuries at the youth level, at the high school level, the college level, and at the pro level. It's off the chart. Ridiculous amounts of injuries. And, I'm in the fixer-up, but I'd rather prevent them from even happening. And we can spend hours as to why. But real quickly, in a nutshell, I mean, the youth players today. I mean, I'm just turned over the big 5-0 in last February, so I'm almost going to be 51. When I was a kid, we went outside and played. And you don't see that. You don't see the movement. Kids are really, the only time they're really moving is when they're essentially in an organized activity. So kids aren't moving. I don't think they learn the basic movements that, I did as a kid, and I mean, I just remember hours of emulating, batting stances and emulating how pitchers pitch. And that really, I think, looking back on it, really taught me how to move, because if you can emulate someone, you can get their movements down. I don't see that enough. And, whether there's a connection there, I'm not sure, but certainly there's a lot of things that I see on social media for training that is cringeworthy for
me. When you talk about that, Kevin, you talk about the prevention of injuries. And I want to talk certainly about movements too, and just about what kids should be doing. I definitely want to come back to that, but I want to talk about just the prevention of injuries first. What do you think are some of the most important things, or some of the key things that we're missing to prevent injuries in the first place? Like, do kids need to, say, for example, I told you before we started recording, I've got 3 kids, 7-year-old, 4-year-old, and 2-year-old, and just say that they like sports, and as they get older, it becomes apparent that they're pretty good. They have a chance to, be pretty good athletes, maybe play something in college. How do I prevent them from getting hurt? Like, what's the best way to do that? Like, I'm a former baseball coach, but I don't have the degrees that you do. I know how to coach baseball, but I don't know on the physical therapy side of things how to keep people healthy, or how to get people healthy when they're hurt. What do I need to do to keep my own kids healthy? Or, if I end up coaching a little league team when my boy is old enough to play little league, like what do I need to do, or what do I need to encourage other parents to do? How do you prevent injuries that we're seeing so much of these days in baseball?
Yeah, so for me, I always say that I'm the parking garage physical therapist, meaning if we build a nice building, everyone likes to be in the penthouse, and we like to do all these fancy type of exercises, but if we don't have a stable foundation or a parking garage, that building is coming down. So for me, I really have it down to 3 movements that anyone at any level has to master. And that is a proper coordinated squat, a movement called scapular depression, and really quick, that is that your shoulder blades drop, like if we're on a seesaw, essentially, when my arms go up in the air, my shoulder blades, by kinesiology, not Kevin McGovern, should drop down or turn down. That's called scapular depression. That is missing or completely backwards in most athletes. And the third, and probably the most important principle, is really to move from your center or your belly button, especially in rotational movements, move what I call proximal to distal, from your spine or from your nervous system out. And if you take those 3 simple movement laws, you can apply them to everything, and you will find that most injury, not all, in medicine, there's never all or none. Most injury is attributed to one, two, or all three of those basic movement principles being out or off kilter or poorly trained.
As the parent of young kids or as the coach of young kids, how do I learn about scapular depression or what I need to do to move from center? Because as you mentioned, there's whether it's related or not, I don't know, but social media has played a big part. I think it's played a part, at least, in the injuries in baseball today. And I only say that because there are people that are quote unquote teaching through social media, and some of it's great and some of it's not nearly great. But you see a lot of people that are teaching something, whether it's right or wrong. They're teaching baseball movements, they're teaching mechanics, they're teaching whatever. Where are there any resources that families can visit to learn more about, a proper squat? I think it's a lot easier to learn that. I think I would assume that most people with a CSCS certification would be able to teach you how to do a proper squat. But what about a scapular depression and moving from center, proximal to distal? Is that stuff like, can I Google that? Can I go to a physical therapist? Can I go to a movement specialist, which I think you're kind of consider yourself a movement expert? Do I need to come to someone like you, or how do I learn how to do this stuff and apply it to baseball in order to stay healthy within the movements in the game?
Sure. It's a great question. I'm going to kind of back up a little and stick up for my profession. The physical therapist, not just me, the physical therapist in general is the most highly trained movement people on the planet. Okay. Right now to be a physical therapist, you're in school for 7 years, plus clinical. That's a long time. So we're the most highly trained as far as I'm concerned about human movement, yet in the pyramid of training or movement, we seem to be at the bottom of the totem pole. So people are only coming to visit a physical therapist when the injury has already happened, and that's too late. And when I do camps or clinics, I usually either start or leave people with this piece of advice. You trust the physical therapist to fix your body when you're off the field and injured. Imagine what we could do for the healthy, right? So, we've been, the dentists have the corner on the marketing market for what I'm about to say, right? Everyone goes to the dentist twice a year and brushes their teeth, hopefully twice a day, because, we're told from a very young age that, well, we only have one set of teeth. Well, we only have one body. And I think people need to start using the physical therapist like the dentist to go once or twice a year to get a checkup. A lot of that stuff is covered by insurance, but there's other concierge level physical therapists like myself that you can go and get, from head to toe to get checked out, to be put on a proper exercise program with proper technique, okay? Because the old adage, practice makes perfect. That's wrong. Practice makes permanent. So if we practice something that's wrong, it's going to be wrong. There's no knock on personal trainers and no knock on other strength and conditioning coaches. But your physical therapist has a medical license, which means they had to take a board exam. I had to take an exam to be a certified strength and conditioning coach. But we carry malpractice insurance. We are a medical provider, and we should be at the top of the food chain rather than the bottom. So my advice to you would be to search out a physical therapist in your area to bring your children so they get checked out, so that we look at preventing injury right off the bat. So there's all kinds of tests that physical therapists can do to not only, diagnose current injury, but really what's most important is to predict, future areas of possible injury and get the proper guidance and exercise to correct those.
Today's podcast is brought to you by Diamond Kinetics. No matter what season you're in, our friends at Diamond Kinetics are here to help you train smarter and get better so you can dominate on the field this season. DK's line of mobile-based motion technology products give players and coaches the ability to practice smarter, practice more effectively, and have more confidence in the batter's box and on the mound. DK's Pitch Tracker Smart Baseball and mobile app provides easy-to-understand data, metrics, and pitching analysis right at your fingertips. You'll immediately see velocity, spin rate, and spin direction on all of your pitches. And newly updated features such as auto pitch detection, plus newly added metrics such as spin efficiency and horizontal and vertical break help you get command and control over your entire arsenal of pitches. With Diamond Kinetics, you will train smarter and get better and have more confidence on the field this spring. I hope this next question comes off the right way, but on this podcast, Kevin, I like to kind of play the dumb parent who doesn't know very much but wants to know something, which is a pretty easy role for me to play. It's very natural for me. If I live in a smallish town, and I go to just a physical therapist I find around, is there any reason for me not to trust that physical therapist? I mean, maybe you just already answered this, but I think that's one of the first questions that'll pop into people's minds is, well, if I go to, for example, a strength and conditioning coach, that coach works with athletes all the time. A physical therapist is kind of going to work with everybody. Do I really trust my young athlete with a physical therapist? So I'm just going to ask that. And again, I hope I'm not trying to insult anybody. I just want you to have a chance to address that. I think is maybe a concern for some people.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question, and I will say this with all due respect to other my brothers and sisters in the physical therapy practice. All physical therapists are not the same. Okay, just like all baseball coaches aren't the same, all firemen aren't the same. We're just not the same. So how I would seek out a physical therapist, first and foremost, I would look for someone who is in private practice, okay, someone who is in business for themselves. The reason for that is that they have got to produce results, okay, to get patients to continue to be referred to them and to continue to build their business. So that's number one. No knock on hospital-based therapists, but, a hospital, they don't own the hospital. They're going to get patients coming to the hospital regardless. It's really the private practice practitioner. And then there's enough of us now that are essentially fee-for-service or concierge level that you can look at, usually on someone's website they will tell you that, and they will also tell you that what they specialize in. There's a lot of us now specializing in golf, baseball. I mean, that's kind of essentially what I specialize in, but there are providers out there. You just have to take a little bit to research them, and hey, pick up the phone and call them. Ask them what their philosophy is. Spend 5 minutes and have them, and if you don't feel comfortable, go to the next one until you feel as a parent comfortable that this person knows what they're talking about, and they should be telling success stories. And look at Google reviews, see what people are writing. And one of the things for Google, I will say, if you see someone put 5 stars and put, Jeff was great, Kevin was great. Now, you want someone who will take the time and write a paragraph and write their story. And when you see a bunch of those, that's probably someone who you want to seek out to help.
In baseball, being that I would have to say the majority of baseball injuries are arm-related, elbow, shoulder. Do I need to go see a physical therapist or take my kids to see a physical therapist that specializes in overhand athletes? Baseball, volleyball, softball, even, football quarterbacks, just physical therapists that have a lot of experience with athletes that throw overhand, which is an unnatural movement. Is that something I should look into with their background, or even ask questions like, do you have a lot of experience in that regard? Or do you think that just a physical therapist that might specialize in golf, like a golf, the movement in a golf swing is very similar to a baseball swing, I would assume, from your perspective, but do I need to find someone who has experience with overhand throwing athletes?
1,000%. Okay. Like I said, all physical therapists are not the same. All have different, we're really getting niches and really specialization now. It's kind of, doctors, orthopedic surgeons are doing the same thing. 25 years ago, you went to the the orthopedic surgeon in town, you did your knee, your shoulder, your back. Now everyone's getting highly specialized. And same thing with physical therapists. So I would seek out someone who has a lot of experience with overhand throwing athletes. Ask them their philosophy, get them to show you results, of different case studies or different clients that they have, and really talk about their philosophy on how to treat overhand throwing athletes, for sure. But I will tell you this, and it's funny, and this kind of how our podcast came about. Baseball seems to have an inverse results proportion, meaning there are a lot of people on social media who toot their own horn, who claim that they have ever treated whomever, athletes, and those people are out of the sport. You know what I mean? So the results that you want to look for are people that, for instance, are still playing. So living in New England area, I don't know what Tom Brady's trainer, Mr. Guerrero, I think his name is, what he does specifically, but I know except for someone rolling into the back of Tom Brady's left knee, I believe, like 10 or 15 years ago, that guy's played in the NFL for 20 years completely injury-free. That guy should be put on a pedestal, yet he's scorned, even in New England, as being a witch doctor. So it just seems that baseball's got a lot of negative results for training that seem to get glorified, which I don't understand.
When you say that, you mean what exactly? I don't want to even put words in your mouth.
Yeah,
what do you mean specifically when you say that?
Just look at numbers. So Tommy John, the actual Tommy John, was operated, I believe, in 1974, right? This kind of weird surgery that they're going to try out on him, and I believe he came back, missed a year, and I think threw 250 some odd innings in 1976. So I think he missed 75, okay? Now that same surgery and rehab process is over 2 years, right? So, and now we look at just throwing guys. Let's just talk outfielders, right? So in my era, just naming outfielders on the East Coast: Jim Rice, Jesse Barfield, Dave Winfield, Dwight Evans, all of those guys, Dave Parker, Willie Stargell, could take the ball from their outfield position and throw it to home plate on the fly like it was nothing, right? But now, allegedly, sports medicine and training is supposed to be better, but I'll give you 30 seconds, and besides, Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton, to name me 10 guys that can throw to home plate on the fly in 2021. So to me, that's a inverse result, that somehow with the training, the results get worse. Because really, with everything going on now, that number should be 50 players, 75 players. But you'll be lucky if it's one guy in a team or one guy in the division. So that's kind of what I mean about an inverse result.
And that's kind of where I was going to go next, actually, with something you've already touched on, the meteoric rise in injuries, particularly arm injuries from Little League through Major League Baseball. And this is a question I've asked before, and I want to ask you again, Kevin, because if I'm just being honest, and maybe I'll get ridiculed for this, but I just don't, what I hear with my ears and read with my eyes doesn't match up with what I see in games. It's kind of like you just mentioned, the inverse results. And one of the inverse results is on the pitching side of things, and the incredible number of injuries. So you're a Massachusetts guy, probably. I'm assuming maybe a Red Sox fan. I'm a Pirates fan. Tough to be a Pirates fan, but even as tough as it is to be a Pirates fan, generally speaking, it is just amazing to me how many pitchers they go through in a year, because guys flat out cannot stay healthy. And that's the same for every team in every sport. So I guess I do want to get into the Major League side of things and maybe see if you have some things to say about it, but let's just start at the lowest level, like Little League through high school. Are the growing number of injuries, is it because kids are playing too much and they're overuse injuries? Is it because they're just flat out throwing too many innings, and X number of innings on a young arm is undoubtedly going to cause an injury? Is it because kids are throwing harder and just, the arm wasn't meant to throw overhand, so just by throwing harder does that cause more injuries? Is it because of throwing harder with bad mechanics, like you just kind of started this podcast with? Can you point to at least the younger kids why there is such an increase in injuries? Do you have any? Do we have an answer to that question?
Yeah, I don't think there's one answer, but I will say, and we can maybe get into this, that I don't think that overhand throwing is unnatural. If it was, then our arm wouldn't move in that direction. But we can. So I just go to another sport, right? So let's take baseball out of the equation, and let's go to another similar sport that has, no matter what people are going to challenge me on this, it's the same movement, and that is the sport of tennis. Okay? So the sport of tennis, in a week's worth of tennis tournaments, if a guy goes from whatever they start at to the finals, probably, I don't know, serves overhand 1,000 times, he doesn't need 4 days of rest. He doesn't need, a day off in between matches, 4 days off or anything like that. And guess what? I don't know if one tennis player, maybe there's probably one, that has torn their ulnar collateral ligament, where I can name like 25 guys just this year off the top of my head with the same movement, except for one principle. When the tennis racket is accelerated with full force, it is going with gravity or downhill, because if it wasn't, the ball would be hit out of Wimbledon or out of Flushing Meadows and down the street, right? So when the most force is placed through the tennis ball, that racket is going downhill. And that right there is the biggest issue right now. These guys are throwing against gravity, and Sir Isaac Newton will win every single time. I'm watching these guys, people could be a long toss promoter, or I'm not. I think that when you change, first of all, the arm is designed to work eccentrically. So what that means is eccentric means we're decelerating. Okay, so the arm doesn't come out of its socket and hit the guy in the front row. So we're taking a baseball and trying to throw it 400 feet to build arm strength. That's not where arm strength comes from. Okay, we can talk with Bruce Lee about where power comes from in the short motion to get power, which would be our core. So if we're looking at starting to throw the baseball from center field, meaning my arm is stretched way back there to throw, we're going to get hurt. And what I could tell you is that if we look at every Tommy John injury, you'll see the M, the W, the T, the ball well behind. I mean, if we're talking the Red Sox, Chris Sale's torso is finished and his arm is still at the second baseman. The torque on that arm and elbow, it just can't handle it. Whereas the tennis player, his whole body is coming through. So if he's serving, both his right arm and right leg are coming through the zone. And that is the biggest thing that I teach, is that arm and back leg have to be married. And if they're not, injury is not if, it's a matter of when.
Holy cow, this is going to be a 3-hour podcast after all. Okay, so with what you just said, that's like the opposite, and I'll let me just say this again.
It's the opposite of what everybody teaches.
It's the opposite of what everybody says, and I'm no specialist, and obviously,
is causing injury.
Right. Obviously, I've said something incorrect several times that I've just, I've heard other people that are smarter than me say that the overhand throwing motion is an unnatural motion. That's why we have so many injuries, but you're saying that's not even necessarily the case. But with what you just said, Kevin, that's the opposite of what you hear. You hear constantly about hip-shoulder separation, how important that is to pitching, but you're telling me that that is a really big part of guys getting hurt. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right?
1,000%. It is hip to shoulder separation. I'm gonna teach you. It's a little bit different in timing. So, we have now in the PGA Tour, we've got 160-pound golfers hitting the ball 350 yards like it's nothing. Why? Because they've got unbelievable hip to shoulder separation, meaning their belly button or their torso is finished and their hands are still behind them. But the one difference is they have something in their hand that's delivering the force to the golf ball, which would be the golf club, the tennis racket, the baseball bat. when you're a pitcher, there's nothing else in your hand to deliver the force, and your elbow is hanging out there in peril. You can have hip-shoulder separation, and you should, right? But the movement of the arm and the back leg has to come through at the same time, downhill. If you finish your torso and you leave your arm back there and have that kind of separation, the only thing to bring it through the zone are the small muscles, which is of our forearm and our flexor tendon, and it's going to lose out. I mean, if you watch a martial artist break a block of wood, right, does he, turn his torso and leave his arm well behind him? No. He brings it all through the zone at the same time because that's how the body generates the most power. It's when I teach lessons, the first thing I do to correct somebody is I don't say anything. I said, listen, I want you to envision a folding table. And this is back to my WWE days, right? So we have this folding table, and when you throw the ball, as soon as you let go of the ball, I want you to have enough force to smash that folding table in half, right? Because if you're throwing a baseball with the most force behind it, that should be nothing. You should be able to go through smash a brick in half, and you will see their mechanics change instantly because they will not leave their back leg back, which I call the Nancy Kerrigan, like we're somehow figure skating, right? We've got this huge leg that's hanging back there. You will see them plant their plant foot, turn on a dime, turn their belly button, and that arm and back leg come through, just like, remember if I went back to, just like walking, here I come, and then smash, throw downhill, because the arm should be accelerated last in the kinematic sequence, and boom, right through that table. And no one, as far as I know, is ever going to hurt their arm using it with gravity. It's when it's against gravity. And that term hip-to-shoulder separation is responsible for all these injuries because the sequence of it is wrong. Yes, you want your torso to turn as tight and as quick as you can, but when the sequence comes out to the arm, the leg has to come with it. If you leave the leg back there, the hourglass has started on your pitching career.
And I know that we're not doing this with any visuals, Kevin, which maybe we should for this part, but you're talking about when you're talking about leaving that back leg back there, like a pitcher's back leg is kind of going to come up in the air when they finish, right? Like the heel kind of comes up and points to the sky. That you're talking that, like the back leg should be released as the arm is coming through, as opposed to like dragging on the ground or kind of staying connected to the dirt.
That is correct.
Okay.
Because the body works like this, right? The body works like a merry-go-round, right? We need a stable pillar to rotate around, okay? So if we're a right-handed pitcher, we're loading our right leg, right? So there's our load. As our left leg comes down, now we're transferring power to our left leg. So that now becomes the stable post of the merry-go-round. So everything needs to rotate around it. And if we leave that back leg down, it's kind of like I kind of use the analogy, we're trying to take off in a boat that's still tied to the dock. So I would like to have that back leg, rather than hanging up in the air, to be, as we finished, even or just ahead of that plant leg in a fielding position. And basically what that movement is walking. All I have done was plant it, and I have turned my belly button, and my back leg came with it as if I'm walking through a door, and my arm goes last downhill. And I will tell you this: I certainly didn't play baseball at a high level, high school, and played in a pretty competitive men's league for a while. But I pitched till I was 43. But the last 20 years of pitching, I pitched without an ulnar collateral ligament. I tore mine in half making that throw that we make all the time from first to third base in an infield drill, and tore it completely in 1997. And that's how I really kind of found the way to pitch without pain. And for those people who have played men's league, they know that when you go out to an over 30 tournament in Vegas and you only have 4 pitchers, yeah, you might be throwing 13 innings in a day. So, but you throw with gravity downhill.
That seems like it would be impossible to throw without a UCL. I mean, how's that even possible?
Well, it's just you just have you don't need it. I mean, the only reason you strain your UCL is because you're leaving it hanging back there. You know, and ligaments, for people to know, they're either at their perfect length or they're useless. So, you know, they say like, well, he's got a partially torn ACL. No, it's useless as far as it might be partially torn, but now the body's using another stability sequence to keep the knee healthy. Same thing with he's got a strain of his flexor tendon or a partially torn UCL. It's either at its perfect length or it's not helping.
Oh boy, this is.
I know it's a lot to unpack. I'm sorry.
No, this is great. There's a lot to unpack. This is just going to be like one of 4 podcasts we're going to have to record, so we can just get to all this stuff.
And we're going to get pushback. People are going to disagree, and then I just go back to this. If you disagree, that's fine. Show me what you're disagreeing about, and stop the injuries, right? Because right now the training is a negative result. I mean, I don't know how. I think in one podcast we totaled up how much money was on the disabled list in just pitchers this year, and I think it got close to $1 billion. Meaning what their contracts. I mean, just look at you have Sale, Syndergaard, Severino, and that's just 3 teams in the East Coast that are out. You know, so what's happening out there isn't working. Period.
I want to just ask. There's so many. I've with what you've talked about so far, I have 10 notes written down here that I could ask you any one of these things, but I just kind of want to stick with the most recent. So recently on Twitter, and I bring up Twitter a lot in these podcasts only because people will comment and just be so sure of things. But recently I was having a conversation on Twitter with someone that I actually brought you into it and kind of regretted doing it afterward because you don't have time for that kind of stuff where I just, I don't mind kind of going, having a conversation with somebody. But one of the things that was brought up during this conversation, this person I was talking to we were talking about arm injuries and we were disagreeing with one another, and he showed me a study done by like 4 doctors that said throughout the course of a major league season, the UCL ligament got stronger. Which...
So a ligament, first of all, with any study, so just so we know, with any study, numbers can be manipulated all over the place. So I would have to see that study. But, how did they measure it got stronger? Was there some sort of tensile machine that measured the UCL that it got stronger? Because just even hearing that, I would be like, yeah, I don't know how you're measuring that it got stronger.
And that's why I ask you, because you just said if your UCL, if you're any ligament, if it's not at its perfect length, it's useless to you. And
well, not to me. I mean, that's just the body, right? So
right.
The body. I mean, don't forget, we're talking like millisecond movements, right? So if that UCL isn't at its perfect length, it's going to your forearm muscles to hold stability of your elbow. If that ACL isn't at its perfect length, it's using your hamstring and glute to stabilize that knee. That's not Kevin McGovern fact. That's just kinesiology.
And this study essentially said that as the UCL is stressed, it becomes stronger. And that was, I mean, it was a very, what I read must have been, and the person linked the study, and it must have been just a summary because it was a couple paragraphs. It wasn't long. I'm sure that there was a much longer study somewhere attached to it, which I just don't have time to read. But I read the short summary, and it was like, okay, I'm reading this, but I just can't believe this. I don't have a degree to back this up, but I just can't believe it.
So, it really goes back to, at the end of the day, it's about results. And right now we have injuries on every level at a meteoric rise. We have a case example of 1970 Tommy John coming back pitching until he was close to 50 after being out a year. Now that same surgery, almost 50 years later, is taking almost 3 times the amount of time to come back with there is better surgery techniques, better surgical instruments, better technology, And in my opinion, it's because we have bigger, stronger, faster athletes still on the same poor mechanics, which is throwing into gravity first before we go with gravity. Leaving that arm hanging back there, leaving it exposed, and that's why that one change needs to be done, in my opinion, or these injuries are going to continue to rise at every single level.
I'm going to continue to ask you some dumb questions. It's kind of my specialty on these podcasts. From what I understand, and I say that sort of tongue in cheek, but from what you read on social media, but also just what I think are some of the better pitching coaches in the game and like what they're teaching, that's where velocity, it comes from the good hip shoulder separation. It comes from the arm kind of coming last in the sequence. And I don't know if I'm even going to phrase this correctly, but if someone pitches kind of how you would prefer them to pitch, instead of the arm coming last like a whip or like a catapult or whatever, instead of the arm coming last, if the arm and back legs sort of come through together like a walking motion or like you've kind of said, are they going to be able to throw as hard as they would with the mechanics now? Because kind of what I've seen, read, heard is that, yeah, a lot of pitchers are getting hurt, but it's because they're throwing harder and there's more stress on the arm. And basically, if I did it differently, guys wouldn't throw as hard. So do you want to throw really hard and get a chance to get drafted and get to the big leagues and probably get hurt at some point? Or you can throw with different mechanics and not throw nearly as hard and never get a chance to play pro ball. What do you think of that narrative, Kevin? Can guys throw as hard with what you would consider good mechanics, like tennis-type mechanics? Or is the velocity kind of coming from these bad mechanics because it just allows the body to work in a way that produces this velocity, even though it's also going to produce an injury at some point?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I think that it is certainly the mechanics of the whip and that huge separation where the arm is left exposed and has to whip through the zone. It would be, I can't say definitively if it's going to increase or decrease velocity, but it's certainly going to increase pitcher's life. I mean, we are certainly, obviously, the velocity number is like the gold standard, even though, Greg Maddox's, whatever, he's got 340 wins, will never be broken. These guys are blowing out in 2 years and 3 years, and that's it. I mean, I think it's really kind of the next guy up type of thing. But I mean, guys threw hard, guys have been throwing hard for a long time. I know someone recently told me, like, the radar guns were different back then. It was, at home plate. Now it's right out of the hand. So, that's why velocity, the measurement's different. But, I can't definitively say about the velocity number, but I will say this. If you can't hit a fastball, as far as I know, you can't play in the major leagues. And the guys with the most success rate are guys who can mix in pitches. And I don't believe there's ever been, besides, I don't know how many perfect games have been thrown with guys throwing 101 miles an hour. But to me, you still got to mix the ball around the plate. But right now, velocity is both exit velo, I guess, and pitching velocity is the hot topic. But to kind of, I mean, that's my answer to that. I don't really know. And from my standpoint, something's got to give at some point. Because you're killing arms. It's insane.
Well, that's why I asked you, because it doesn't seem like anybody is really concerned about pitchers' health. The only thing that people are concerned about is velocity. Essentially, for young players out there that are looking to add velocity, kind of like you said at the very beginning, and they're not going to physical therapists to say, how can my body move better? They're going to somebody who, likely doesn't have a degree, but just has maybe a track record of, hey, my buddy went to you last year and he gained 6 miles an hour, so I want to come to you and gain 6 miles an hour. What can you do for me? Like this, and that's all they care about, because and
That's where the
it's
money
not,
is.
right, and it's not a good place for the game to be. But velocity gets you college scholarships. Velocity gets you
Oh, yeah.
on the radar
Sure
for pro teams, and it's like you said, it's like next man up. I don't really care if you get hurt. I'm just going to have a whole team of guys that throw really hard and will hope to keep you healthy long enough to get something out of you, as opposed to the other way. So I thought that was a question it was important to ask, because I wish that the focus was more on health than it is velocity, but it's certainly not. It's certainly on velocity first, and kind of like we'll take our chances on getting hurt. Because if I'm a college pitcher and I'm 86, 88, super healthy for 4 years and have really good secondary stuff, I'm not going to play pro ball anyway. So I might as well try to throw 94 and 95 and see if I can get a chance to keep playing. And if I blow out my arm, at least I gave it a shot. And I don't know that that's the right place to be for the sport right now.
No, but I mean, that's exactly where it is. But, during the playoffs this year, I heard something that I literally cringed. And I don't know, I'm terrible with names, but it was Tampa Bay. The announcers were saying that Tampa Bay brought somebody up who had been a starter, but sent him back down, came up as a reliever, and literally just said, just throw it as hard as you can because you're no longer a starter. Knowing that you're just telling the guy that, you got 450 pitches left in your arm, and that's it. And then we look at the college, was the guy from, was it Vanderbilt, Kumar? Was that his last name?
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Kumar Rocker.
Yeah, Kumar Rocker, right? So he already needs Tommy John surgery. He's already hurt. I mean, it's like, I guess, I actually had an argument with, this physical therapist. It was funny about Chris Sales. And I was like, you actually teach Chris Sales mechanics? And he's like, well, it got into the majors. And he's got, $80 million. And I can't argue with that. Yeah, he's got $80 million. He never has to worry about another thing in his life. But I look at, how many people make it to the major? What's that percentage? I mean, I just looked at the percentage of kids that played in the Little League World Series that play high school baseball. That percentage is so low. I was floored. I forgot what the number was, but it was like, oh my God. I'm just my calling in life is to help people and help people stay healthy. And I guess your 97 is going to get you, $25 million a year. But I look at how many kids trying to get there no longer play baseball or needed surgery trying to get there. And that's just, that just makes me sick to my stomach. But velocity is where the dough is. I can't argue with that.
Yes, it's a weird dichotomy in the sport right now, and I want to talk to you, Kevin, if we have a couple minutes left, and maybe this takes the podcast, maybe this makes the podcast really longer than maybe you want it to be, but I want to talk to you about long toss. You've mentioned long toss already and that you're not really a proponent of that, but I'm just going to go back to kind of what I read and hear in the industry is that long toss is better for your arm than weighted balls. It can produce similar type results, similar type velocity gains, but is maybe safer than weighted balls. But you're not an advocate of long toss. Do you mind talking about that and just why exactly you feel that way? Because that's another thing that is sort of contrary to what I think the industry believes overall.
Sure, I'll kind of throw in another category in here. So Olympic lifting, right? I am such a proponent of Olympic lifting, but with Olympic lifting, your movements have to be so precise not to be hurt, right? So we talk about long toss. It has its place, but when I see a kid, bring the ball from his right ankle up, through South America to throw, making this huge, long, lengthening movement, killing his mechanics, that's not helping. So I use something I like to call skip toss, if we're thinking about an artificial turf field, where someone is throwing on plane, okay, not changing the mechanics, as far as they can, or literally even throwing it with that the force is down with every sort of torso movement down, and there's one hop or 5 hops to their partner. But to throw a big parabola up in the air, it's not. I think it's damaging arms, and the results bear those out because, again, we go back to the results. Injuries are off the charts. Outfielders can barely make the cutoff man. And they're throwing long toss every single day. So something's not working. And the weighted balls, again, most pitchers don't even have scapular control to put, these 5-pound balls in someone. You're asking for problems.
I'm going to bring up another study that I saw recently and just get your thoughts on it. And this is where I kind of brought you in on Twitter the other day. And I know you didn't see the study and probably didn't read it, and that's fine. But I just want to ask you, generally speaking, I read a study done by doctors that said the heavier the ball in weighted ball throwing, the less stress on the UCL. In this study that they showed, and they went all the way up to like 32-ounce balls or something, 35-ounce balls, something like that. The 5-ounce ball was shown in this particular study to have the least amount of stress on the elbow, which just seems absolutely contrary to anything, that any sort of common sense that makes sense to me. And again, I'm not asking you to necessarily speak to that study, but weighted balls, I think, are something that almost every high school program in the country is using. I would say nearly, if not every college program in the country is using weighted balls. And to me, there's a lot of things that people are either ignoring or they don't know, or maybe we just as an industry don't really know yet. But can I get your thought on weighted balls and the idea, generally speaking, that throwing weighted balls actually puts less stress on your arm? And if that's true, how that's true, and if you have a contrary thought, I'd love to hear it as well.
I actually probably think that it's true, right? So if we throw a basketball, right, the length of the full court, you're not getting much stress on your elbow, right? Because your body is adapting to the size and the weight of the ball, okay? So we talk about throwing something 7, 8, 10 ounces, you're getting that lag behind in your arm, right? Because your body's like, oh, I can just whip this. Whereas if I'm holding something that's 5 pounds, like a shot put, your body instinctively knows, I can't leave my arm back here. I'll snap it off, and it gets more of the body into it. So I could see in some sort of study where that actually might be true for sure. But one of the things I talk about with any kind of exercise is what is the purpose of doing it, okay, and where the movement comes from. So if we're talking about weighted balls, again, that's breaking the law of kinesiology of proximal to distal. We need proximal strength and coordination to get distal power, strength, whatever. So it's working opposite. If it's as a head, the power is coming from the torso, from the glutes, from the back extensors, from the chest. So it's not coming from the arm. Those are the small muscles, okay? Like, I just go back to the sport of golf. These golfers did not get hitting the ball 350 yards by swinging a weighted club, right? They got strong because their core got strong to be able to turn it faster, quicker, with more power, which delivered, as it went down the kinetic chain, to the golf club, to the golf ball. And that's where power comes from. And that's not my opinion, that's where it comes from. But when you're arm focused, you're just asking for problems. You really are. And again, the results bear that out because injuries are on a crazy ride, meteoric ride. If injuries are going down, then someone would have an argument. But right now, something needs to change, and it needs to change fast.
So I've heard before that weighted balls, part of the reason to throw weighted balls is that, especially with the heavier balls, like ones that are significantly heavier than a baseball, and that maybe this matches up with what you just said, that your body will sort of naturally adapt to that heavier object, and you'll have better mechanics just because your body is going to adapt. Because like you said, your body knows if I throw in the same motion I normally throw with, my arms are going to snap off, like throwing a basketball the length of the court, or like throwing, a ball that's 4 or 5 pounds or whatever it may be. So for that reason, if weighted balls do you think that weighted balls can have that sort of effect Do you buy into that? I've read that. Do you buy into that if you use weighted balls properly, that it can actually teach your body better mechanics, which is one of the things that I think you're after, just at the core of what you do as a physical therapist. Better mechanics will help will prevent a lot of injuries. Do you think that weighted balls can be something that advocates that?
I think maybe like on a scale of 1 to 10, like 10, we have to get the body to understand how it moves, to get the basics of movement down. I mean, I have never, in my 27 years of practice, I have never treated an overhand throwing athlete that has proper scapular depression coordination. So that's the basic movement of my shoulder. Remember, the shoulder is connected to a bone that's swimming in your back, right? So if that bone, that scapula, is not fine-tuned, nothing else after that is going to be correct. So, like, could you throw a heavy ball with perfect mechanics that will help you? Yes, but that would be what I would call doctoral level human movement, right? Just like doing a 350-pound deadlift. Are deadlifts great for strength? Absolutely. But one false move and you're in trouble. And I just think that we really need to focus at the parking garage first, get all our human movements down correct before we worry about what the penthouse looks like. Because, again, we can have the nicest penthouse in the world. If our foundation is bad, the building's coming down. I mean, that sounds like kind of a caveman type of answer, but it's really in the basics of human movement, and these kids and adolescents and pro guys don't have the basics of human movement. They just don't. Or the injuries would be less.
So I'm going to finish up with this question. If I'm a pitching coach, Kevin, at any level, 12-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 25-year-olds, do I need to have the same degree that you do to be a good pitching coach? Or can I just learn some basic things from someone like you and have a chance to be a good pitching coach? And to define good pitching coach, I would just say to keep if I'm going to keep guys healthy, if I'm going to keep kids, guys, however you want to term it, healthy, do I need to have the degree that you do, or can I learn some basic things, those 3 basic things you talked about at the beginning, how to do a proper squat, scapular depression, and moving from your center proximal to distal? Can I just, if I talk to someone like you who has the degree and master those things, can I be good at that skill, keeping players healthy, keeping them moving properly? Do I need to have your degree to be good at this, to be a good pitching coach who keeps guys healthy, Kevin, or can I talk to people like you and know what I need to know?
Absolutely, you do not need my degree at all. But you do need an understanding of human movement. I've taught probably 15 or 20 like pitching coaches how to move, how the body moves. Because we can be a bad hitting coach, right? And the result will be your guy goes 0 for 37. We can be a bad infield coach and the guy makes 10 errors. If we're a bad pitching coach, someone gets hurt, right? So, and just because you rode a bus from Jacksonville to North Carolina in the Carolina League and he played doesn't make you a pitching coach. I think you need to have a more than basic understanding of human movement, and you need to have a more than better understanding of what movements cause injury. But can you learn them? Absolutely, 1,000%. People can be taught anything. I'm not sure my curveball grip is the best, but when I teach someone how to move, I'm teaching them in a way that keeps them first and foremost keep them healthy, because that's what my job is.
This has been great. When it comes time for this podcast to come out, I'm going to promote this podcast as something that I think anybody that's involved in youth sports, youth baseball, whether they're a parent or a coach or whatever, needs to listen to. And at the very least, hopefully this points people in the right direction as to what their next steps need to be. I'm not kidding in that I say that as someone with 8 years of college coaching experience and a pretty good amount of success albeit on the hitting side and the recruiting side of things. If my little boy ends up deciding to play baseball and he's good at it and likes it, I honestly, before this call, would not have been scheduling an appointment yearly with a physical therapist just for him to go to and sort of get evaluated and get some exercise programs and things like that. But I'm going to now. I mean, it's something that I've recorded like 160 of these things, and I have my background in baseball that I do, but that's not something that would have been on my radar before this podcast. So if nothing else, hopefully people that listen to this got some things like that out of the podcast and have a better idea of how to move forward with either as a coach or as a parent, or even if an athlete's listening to this, just what the next steps are to stay healthy, because throwing pain-free and having a career, however long that career lasts, through high school, college, pro ball, whatever, where you're healthy, like, you're going to be an anomaly if that's who you are, and your life is going to be so much more enjoyable if you don't have to go through Tommy John and that whole the whole recovery process. So Kevin, this has been a really great podcast for me, and hopefully it's not the last time you're here. This is Dr. Kevin McGovern, everybody, who is as a doctor of physical therapy and certainly has given us a ton of great information. I can't say thank you enough for all that you've talked about and given us here, and just thank you for your time. And there were times, obviously, in this podcast I wasn't even sure what direction to turn because there were so many things we brought up, but hopefully other people learned as much as I did in this podcast.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. One quick thing before I go, you had mentioned in my bio my Velocity RX program. So I am diligently working on an online course at different levels, one for the parent and player, one for the coach, and one for the medical professional, of how to teach proper corrective exercise, evaluate them using my G.A.M.E test, because anyone can be taught how to do this. I've done this, to be able to get that out to be, hopefully, at least try to be one of the solutions to this epidemic of arm injuries.
It's a resource I think people should definitely check out. So, Kevin, thank you again for being here, and hopefully we can have you back.
Thank you for having me.